Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are having a wonderful start to your week, staying safe, staying loaded, and of course negotiating those high rates. Today, as I do every single month, we are going to be looking at the performance of our two flatbeds, both of which are operated by my business partners. Now, today's video will be a little bit different because I want to fit in a mini lesson for those people that are constantly screaming, "Park your trucks." Will I piss some people off? Most likely, but you know what? My hope is that we all walk away from this video with a clearer understanding of how to calculate the numbers of your operations. Ready? Let's go. Now, before we actually go, a quick reminder, these two trucks are operated by my business partners, so there are no driver wages here. They do owner draws. Okay, let's go to the board. All right, let's start looking at some numbers. Here we have the 53-foot flatbed. Here we have the 48-foot flatbed. I'm going to go through it relatively quickly with some explanations, but this is because I don't want this video to be too long. First of all, gross income. 53-foot flat, $26,680. This is because this business partner didn't run as much. He had home time finally, and also his truck broke down, which cost him a couple of days until we were able to get another truck from our fleet. Then for the 48-foot flat, $36,990. This includes a load that was booked on the last day of May 31st, that delivered on June 5th. We count the income the day the load is booked. Then we have the deadhead miles. As you can see, the 48-foot flatbed had less deadhead miles. You will see why in a bit. Here are our loaded miles and total miles. Again, this includes that last load, which went until June 5th. That's why the miles are so high. Now, this is the point I imagine some of you will decide to start writing your comments, and I can imagine what they're going to say. You are the reason the market is so bad. The rate per mile is horrible. You don't know how to negotiate, whatnot. But before you guys jump to conclusions, there are a few things you should know. Number one, the month of May was an experimental month, and I'll tell you what I mean in just a bit. Number two, both of these flatbeds started out their months in horrible areas. The 53-foot one because of home time in California, the 48-foot one because of my mistake sending my guy to Massachusetts. Number three, and most importantly, the market did decline from the month of April for flatbeds. All right, let's look at the expenses. Again, this is our 53-foot flatbed, 48-foot flatbed. And just as a reminder, if you guys don't know, these are two separate companies. This is our original company and our baby company. That's why the expenses differ, right? So for our original company for this truck, no truck payment, it's paid off, thank goodness. There is a $1,000 payment per month for the rental of the flatbed, insurance, maintenance. The reason it's bold here is because I'm sure some of you will ask what happened to that $11,000 expense. That expense did not hit yet. It's not finalized. This is something we will know this month, in the month of June, and that expense is going to go under this month. So we're calculating for the month of May. This is the maintenance expense. Then we have fuel, filings, consumables, ELD, load board, and other. This other expense is the hotel stay while this truck broke down, right? The truck broke down, it went for repairs. This business partner had to stay in a hotel. Voila. Then we have the 48-foot flatbed. We do have a truck that's being financed, $3,452, 2023 Freightliner. $995 is the flatbed rental. We have insurance, maintenance. If you're wondering why the insurance decreased from last month, it's because last month it was a mistake. They were charging us for two trucks under this company when we already sold one months and months ago. So finally they corrected it. Still, the insurance is ridiculously high, but this company is newer. Maintenance, fuel expenses, consumables, ELD, and there is nothing else. So if we look at the total expenses here, the net profit is $16,740. Let me just write it down here so you guys don't get confused. And our cost per mile for this month was 92 cents per mile. For the 48-foot flatbed, our cost per mile was higher, 96 cents per mile, partially because the truck payment is very high. $14,890 in expenses, $22,099 in net income. Now let's take a look at both of these equipments on a load-by-load basis. So starting with the 48-foot flatbed, we have the from state to state right here. We have the rate, deadhead miles, loaded miles, total miles, loaded rate per mile, total rate per mile, cost per mile, and profit per mile, okay? The yellow highlighted cells are either my mistake or experimental loads. Okay, Virginia to Virginia, Virginia to Virginia. Because I sent my guy to Massachusetts the month before, we ended up in Virginia on the 1st of the month in May. And we got stuck there. And it was really, really annoying because it was really hard to find decent loads to decent areas. Finally, the third load we booked, I decided to bite the bullet. And that's why I got $1.96 per mile. This is for total miles, including the deadhead. It was $2.14 for loaded miles. I needed him to go to Texas. Now the bold, if you can see right here, let's see, right here, these are weekend loads. These are weekend loads, and what you can see is the total rate per mile for these weekend loads is not great. The reason is because I prioritize during the weekend, I prioritize going to a good place for as close to $3,000 for the weekend because my goal is to make at least $1,000 a day. I'll explain why. Now, finally, of course, these are the experimental loads. We went from Georgia to California. It's not a great rate per mile. I think for California it should pay more, but this is what it was. We wanted to see what it's going to do to our net income as well as variable expenses. And then, of course, getting out of California is a disaster. The only load, the highest paying load I could find was for $1.75 with deadhead, right? And this load was to Florida. Mess, absolute mess. But if we look at the cost per mile, here we have the total rate per mile and cost per mile, we can see we turned a profit each and every time. Our fixed costs are very, very high. Our variable costs we are maintaining pretty well, I would say. All right, let's take a look at the 53-foot flatbed. As I said before, this business partner, he had home time at the beginning of the month. So he ended up in Oregon in the beginning of the month. I booked him a load to California to bring him home. And then, of course, from California, it's very hard to find a decent paying load. So I found the one that was paying the highest, $2.75 for loaded miles or $2.49 with deadhead. But this load was going to New Mexico, right? So from New Mexico, we had to deadhead to Texas, 659 miles, because I was not about to take the loads that were offered from New Mexico. And there's a very small amount of loads there. Basically, this is the load. I always calculate the deadhead miles when calculating the rate per mile. This load, it was $3.16 loaded, but because of that deadhead, $1.55. Ruined our average rate per mile completely. But you know what? It is what it is. If you're not calculating your deadhead, all that deadhead that you're doing, you're not getting the right calculation. So then we have these loads. We had the weekend load to Indiana. Again, I was trying to get as close to $3,000 as possible. Got $2,600. Not great. $2.21 with the deadhead miles. And then around, where was it? This is the load where the truck broke down. This is the load that cost us extra loads because this was supposed to deliver on a Friday before Memorial Weekend. Instead, we got stuck. We had to get towed. Our truck was there. And basically, we had to get our other truck and redeliver this load the following Tuesday. So we lost a bunch of days there, unfortunately. And then, of course, Missouri to California. The reason we grabbed this load is not because of home time. The reason we grabbed this load is because we wanted to finish up the month strong in terms of gross income, right? Now, do I regret doing this? Yeah, because today I was struggling getting him out of California again, but you know, it is what it is. The end of the month is always one of those moments where I get very, very nervous. All right, now we're going to be looking at this chart for our 48-foot flatbed, and we're comparing April to May. April is the blue lines or blue bars. May is the red bars. As you can see, the miles almost tripled. The gross income didn't even double. It was higher than that, but we'll say it doubled from last month. The expenses increased by around $1,000, despite the fact that we ran a bunch more miles. And the net income grew by 7 times from the month of April. Now, this is where I'm going to fit in that mini lesson for those who believe that all carriers should park their trucks. So let's take a look at this chart right here. This is our rate per mile, cost per mile, and profit per mile. For those of you who have watched my video from last month, it included the 48-foot flatbed numbers. You can see that the rate per mile this month dropped by quite a bit. Last month, our average rate per mile was, for all miles, $2.73, which means that it dropped by 35 cents this month. Now, if this happened, the rate per mile dropped by quite a bit, as we can see. How is it possible that the net income increased by 7 times from last month? If your answer is more miles, you're correct, but not just more miles, it's more loaded miles. As carriers and as owner-operators, we have 2 types of expenses. We have those variable expenses such as fuel, maintenance, driver salary, especially if they drive on a cents per mile basis, but also if they're driving on a percentage of gross. All of that depends on whether you're running or you're parked. If you're parked, fuel goes away, maintenance goes away, all those variable expenses go away. But we also have this thing called fixed expenses. These include things like insurance, truck and trailer payments, ELD, load board, and so on. These expenses do not go away the moment you park your truck. And these are the expenses that end up killing those carriers and owner-operators who park their trucks. So miles, loaded miles, is what made a difference for the 48-foot flatbed this month. After all, cost per mile, right? Let me move this. Cost per mile is calculated by the total expenses, or if you want to break them down, that's fine. Expenses divided by the total, wow, my handwriting is amazing. Total miles, if you can't read that. That's how the cost per mile is calculated. If your miles are decreasing, that cost per mile is more. Does that make sense? And if your fixed expenses are high, you're in trouble. Now, if your miles are increasing, and I'm talking about miles which generate income, not deadhead miles, right? Those cost you money. If the miles are increasing and that income is coming in, of course, your cost per mile will be less, and your profit per mile might be more depending on whether you know what your cost per mile is. So what I'm trying to say is I understand those people who say park your trucks. They're talking about the carriers who are running at a loss. So I'm here to tell you, you have to know your cost per mile. If you do not, if your cost per mile is $1, and or let's say $1.30, and your average rate per mile is $1.20, you're losing 10 cents on each mile you drive. Knowing your cost per mile is extremely important. But there's another thing that is equally as important. You need to know your cost per day. The way you do this is you take all the expenses for the month, or you can estimate for the next month. You take all your expenses for the month, fixed and variable, you can divide them if you want, and divide it by the number of days in the month. You will understand what your daily expense is to operate your truck. And your goal is to book a load that pays higher per day than your expenses. Now, another trick is overestimate your expenses if you are estimating them, because it basically gives you a safety cushion. I like to underestimate the income and overestimate the expenses. That's why I never include any detention, tonneau, or any accessorials in these charts that I show you. I don't even consider those income until they actually hit my bank account, because brokers are wishy-washy. They might pay, they might not. Now, I calculated this. Our daily income for the 48-foot flatbed in the month of May was on average $1,120 per day, while our expenses, fixed and variable together, was $451 per day. So obviously, that is why we have a higher profit per mile since April, and of course a higher net income. So to summarize this video, when it comes to the rate per mile, obviously we did much worse than we did in April. But again, we wanted to experiment with those longer loads to see what it will do to our net income and what it will do to our variable expenses. Now, while our expenses increased for that 48-foot flatbed, as they should have, after all, it ran quite a bit more than in the month of April, our net income grew by 7 times. Now, I completely understand, and something you should understand is these numbers are based off of the operations of my business partners. If you're hiring a driver, your expenses will increase, the variable expenses will increase based on how much your driver is actually driving. If you're hiring a dispatching service that takes a percentage of the load, that expense will increase the more money you earn. But the point I wanted to make in this video is this: parking your truck is an excellent idea in theory. It works if your fixed expenses are either very, very low or non-existent. And as a carrier, one of the biggest expenses, fixed expenses, is insurance, of course. So that means that those carriers, small carriers, have to voluntarily revoke their authority and reinstate it later on when they're ready to hit the market again, right? Because they need to let that insurance lapse. But the majority of owner-operators and smaller carriers at the least have those truck and trailer payments, those fixed costs. Not everyone can afford to buy their truck cash or their trailer cash, so they're financing, and that is a fixed cost that comes out of their pocket every month, regardless of whether they're running or they are parked. This is why so many carriers, smaller carriers and owner operators, are choosing not to park their trucks. This is just to give you an idea of what is going on. That being said, every single one of us has to be extremely thorough in our calculations. We have to know our cost per mile, especially our fixed cost per mile. We have to overestimate our variable costs per mile. We have to know our daily expenses, estimate them, fixed plus variable. Estimate what it costs you every day to run your truck. And of course, using all of those numbers, that is how you have to make decisions about which load to take and which load not to take. The question is it better to sometimes deadhead than take a really bad load? There are times when it is better to deadhead to a better area than take a crap load. The reason is a loaded truck eats up more fuel and of course more of your time, because loading, unloading, all of that time matters. In cases like this, yes, it's better to deadhead. That is exactly what we did from New Mexico to Texas. New Mexico had a very limited amount of loads. They were really, really bad. It was easier to deadhead to save time and money. And the main thing is when you deadhead to a better place, average everything out. Don't forget those deadhead miles. They count too. Anyway, guys, I know I went on a little bit of a rampage there. I do apologize. I hope you learned something new from this video. I hope you gained some insight maybe. In either case, again, don't forget to know your numbers. They never lie. All right, before I get too passionate again, and I can get carried away, seriously carried away, I'm wishing you all an amazing week ahead, and I'll see you in the next video.